I guess we're here. Thank you all for joining us. And my name is Anne Gray. I'm going to be the moderator of a discussion of creative cursing this morning, which is being recorded for posterity, as our tech host put it. And we welcome questions, suggestions. Things can be put in the chat. If you really want to make sure something comes to my attention, please add it to the Q&A. We're going to be discussing, according to our description, it's a trite joke that people learn other languages just for the curse words, but cursing and bad language says a lot about a society and what it considers important. Panelists will talk about how you can develop curse words and insults to add to your world without sounding like a children's cartoon. So that is our purview, and I'm going to start by asking each of our lovely panelists to introduce themselves, say a little bit about yourself, and maybe what is your interest in this area. So Anna, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Hi, my name is Anna Kashina. I'm a fantasy author. I write secondary world fantasy and fantasy series. And to me, creative cursing is like a big part of world building. So I usually start my world with very few things, and curse words is one of them. So I think it's a hugely important topic, and yeah, it's also a lot of fun. So I hope we can get the curse on this panel. Okay.
Oh, for sure. Okay. Doc, could you introduce?
Good morning. I'm Doc Coleman. I'm a steampunk author. I write steampunk comedy adventure. Now, admittedly, I don't have a lot of cursing in my books as of yet, but I have long been somewhat disappointed with the way that modern English handles cursing, and I think there's a lot of creative examples from other languages and cultures, and that instead of using a handful of words deemed obscene, we should broaden our repertoire of invective. So,
well, fuck, Doc. I mean, we've got one of the most versatile words in the fucking universe. So,
yes, but you can't rely on it.
That word is timeless.
Sorry, straight there. All right, Daniel, please introduce yourself. And
hi, I'm Daniel M. Ford. I'm a fantasy and mystery novelist. I've written the Paladin trilogy and the Jack Dixon mysteries. And I'm looking forward to talking about some fucking curses, I guess, if we're doing that.
Okay. I was raised by a mother who swears like a sailor, and we were just talking before this, which reminded me of one of the most particular things that she uses without necessarily thinking about it that can offend other people, which can be an interesting sort of situation that I don't see too much in writing, but as far as the inadvertent offense, but you do see people inadvertently revealing where they're from, which is to use the name of your god or holy figure. As my mom often, something happens, she gets frustrated. She's, Jesus Christ. And I saw that in, for instance, Lynn Flewelling. I recently reread Stalking Darkness in that series that she did. And so she has regional gods and goddesses who are called upon, and some of them are really, kind of like we would have with the Romans and the Greeks, same god, different name. And so by who they swear by, you can kind of tell where someone has come from. So in that region area, there's swearing that that has to do with calling on some power to help you, and then there's also the blasphemy sort of side of that. So Anna, you seem to indicate you had some thoughts on that sort of thing.
No, just so I wanted to agree. So yeah, one like important part of world building and cursing is the beliefs. So we swear by our gods and our devils, and you use the word hell. So a very big part of my world building always starts like, so I developed this system of beliefs. And one of the first things I do after like I name all the deities and all the demons is to create a cursing system. And yeah, so that's like kind of the big picture. And then there are regions, absolutely. So you want to have some regional cursing by which people like reveal where they're from, like what they believe in, what they don't believe in. And I think this, so this in itself is just kind of, to me, it's a great fun of world building to create the cursing system. And it also becomes part of character development, because some characters curse a lot and other characters feel like it's impossible to utter a curse word. And like, so it's sometimes based on gender, upbringing, or social class. And it's just, so all of this kind of, when you weave it into a novel, you just get this extra dimension just from a few small words put here and there. And yes, some profanities are timeless, and yeah, we use them too. So I actually don't use a lot of profanities in my novels, but I do use a lot of creative cursing. And I think, yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, you see age variations too, right? Like I remember when I was in high school, I did a little bit pick up the tendency to say, fucking A, you know, like off, or like we often used it as a confirmation, like that something was awesome. Fucking A. And that's, you know, young people will tend to play with that sort of thing. But again, because my mom cursed a lot, and I didn't really like it when she damned the entire world to hell when she couldn't find her cigarettes. I pretty much don't ever curse at people. That was another distinction you were talking about, Anna, or I guess our host was talking about the difference between cursing something upon someone, and just cursing because, you know, as an expletive or an expression. But friends have mentioned that to me, that if something happens and I actually curse, that they know that it was something really intense that I was feeling, because I don't usually. Daniel, did you have something to add on that world building sense?
Yeah, I think that cursing will tell you a lot about what a culture thinks is important and what it is afraid of, what its taboos are, and richness to the language in your world building. In my first trilogy, I had written it with a lot of just normal, you know, English cursing, and the publisher was like, no, we want this to be PG-13. So I had to do a lot of editing. And one of the things I already had in there is that people in the main region where the book takes place have a vision of an afterlife of torment they call the cold, because they experience great extremes of weather, right? Like winter is a time where people just die because it's so cold. So that's their vision of of a punished afterlife, is called the cold. So I just turned all the fucks to freezes, right? I just, like, instead of saying, you know, it would be like freezing as an expression of exclamation or catharsis or whatever, any of those, you know, five curses that five things that Steven Pinker, the linguist, says that cursing does. You could do, is pretty easy to just, you know, search for do a word search and replace, and modify it a little bit, and I think it worked out okay.
So what are those 5 things, those 5 roles? Do you know?
Yeah, they can be descriptive, idiomatic, abusive, emphatic, or cathartic. Those are the 5. Now, he's not necessarily like the last word, but he's a linguist and psychologist who wrote a lot about language and cursing, and said those are basically the 5 things we use swear words for. Right. And of course, there's a difference. Like, not all swear words are profanities or curses, and not all curses have to be profane either. Right. Not all curses have to use swear words necessarily.
Yeah, a familiar one to most people probably is Monty Python with the French at the castle saying, your mother was a hamster and your father smelt of elderberries, right? Comes along pretty clearly, but no profanity. Doc, you want to jump in?
Yes, I very much relate to the idea that the words that a particular culture uses represent what they value and what they fear. The example being like in a desert-based culture where water is very scarce, then you might have curses like dust and sand, because it's like this is stuff they have a lot of, but it's useless. I think of the Ring of Time series, or the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan, where a lot of characters use the curse blood and blood and ashes, or blood and bloody ashes, and that all refers back to the breaking of the world, and Luz Theron going mad and killing people and destroying the landscape. But it also shows the impact that that event had on the culture, that's still a curse an age later.
Yeah, I think it can, it's good when you understand as a reader where that kind of curse comes from. I think it can actually throw you out of a book if something like that exists and you don't have the story. I just finished reading The Gripping Hand by Purnell and Niven, and they introduced the phrase, it was something like rape a lizard. And it was, I mean, and a lot of phrases like that you might use just as an exclamation or cathartic way of saying something don't necessarily make sense, but that one was so specific that I was like, what is the story there? But it was never explained.
Yeah, I think in my observation, a lot of times authors are aware of this, that yeah, you need to create some curses which make your world distinctive. They may not necessarily do it well. So when it's well done, we all know. And then if it's not well done, we notice it too, because curses are just so hugely important. It's like this few words for the entire book that would kind of, in some ways, would make or break your believability of your world. So yeah. So I think, and then there's a comment in the Q&A. I know that we're not probably taking questions yet, but I think it was interesting because it says that in French, a lot of good curses are about religion. And so, and whether it indicates the importance of this religion in this society. And I don't know the answer to that possibly, but it made me think, so my native language is Russian. And in Russian, most of the curses are not related to religion, but like they're mostly like F words. And in Russian, they're so strong that you absolutely don't say it in a mixed company or with people you don't know. So I think when I moved to America and I was like translating those words, when I hear the word fuck, I translate it into Russian. And it's like, oh my God, how could they say it? And I mean, I still, so it took me maybe 20 years to be able to use this word in my books and only in very adult situations. So I think this relative kind of topic of the cursing and the weight of each curse is very important. And also, so if you use it well as an author, it can tell you a lot about society, because so in Russian, literally, so I've also known some friends who don't know Russian, but they learned this one word and they like it because if they say it like with Russians around, all the Russians basically just drop everything they were doing, like freeze and horror. And it's like very powerful. So one small word can cause this reaction in a big room of people. So yeah.
The shock. Yeah, I think the world, the SB's question, which I was actually just going to go to, so thank you, was saying, they curse a lot about religion, but not body parts or missions. And, what does that indicate? And, I do kind of, never been to France, but I do kind of think of them as a place that's fairly open about bodily functions and sex and things like that. So they wouldn't have the shock effect to talk about that. Doc, you said you wanted to respond to this?
Honestly, I was marking it because we were talking about it, but I mean, I know that the French definitely does have curse words that refer to body parts and various bodily emissions. I can't really talk about what the really good ones were. I never got that far into French in high school.
Some of them are very expressive too. Like I've always said that you have to listen to La Femme Nikita in French because shit doesn't really sound like much of anything, but merde is very expressive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody in the chat says many French curses are about sex parts, but we use it more often.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to add that curses are effective not just because of what they mean, but because of how they sound. So it's like so a kind of a powerful sound. The curse word is very important, and I think also so this is something that authors sometimes do really well and sometimes do really badly, and this is something to remember. So I always say my curse words out loud to make sure that they're like the right ones. And yeah, like I said, nerd sounds like if you pronounce it with a correct French accent, it sounds a lot better than shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Anouk says merde is very used, and couler, fuckers is derogative but very used. That's useful to know. Any other any examples you want to bring up of places where authors use that kind of expressiveness really effectively with their own culture?
So I personally love
Does
British cursing. Sorry, I cut in again.
okay.
So yeah, one of my favorite authors is Terry Pratchett, and he just uses like very conventional British cursing so beautifully that yeah, just you want to reread this line when somebody says bloody hell. It's always like said in such a beautiful way. So I love that, and yeah, I think in my own books I tend to gravitate toward that, even though yeah, I do have like
Yeah.
if it's not deities but just general curses, then yeah, beautiful
Yeah.
British cursing I think is very hard to beat, especially in the English language. Yeah. And sorry, I cut in. Doc, you were saying something?
Actually, I was just thinking when you're talking about British cursing that the British have a very unusual relationship to curse words. I mean, if you only look at the high society, you won't see this as much. But for instance, the word cunt is extremely offensive in Britain, and yet this is what people will call their friends. They will greet each other as cunts or tell people to stop being a cunt. And they use it incredibly much in some of the lower and working classes, but it's like, you know, it's offensive, but you use it anyway.
But it's obviously not as offensive as in America, because if we use it in America,
Yeah, in America we don't.
we're done for. Yeah.
What were you saying, Dan?
Yeah, that's actually, I curse like a sailor in my daily life when I'm not at my job. I'm in around high schoolers. I'm a high school English teacher, so I can't curse unless it's in the book. But that's the one word I don't say. Like, I'm not even going to say it here. That word is just too far, right? And I don't know what that says about me or my upbringing, or like, did I go to Catholic school for too long, or what? But yeah, I cannot use that word. Not in a book, not out loud.
Well, I actually haven't heard people say it in America ever, so this could be cultural too. I don't know.
Well, I actually confronted somebody over saying it at a game, like a D&D game, like a couple years ago. A friend of mine, like somebody I've known for 20 years, used it, and I was like, nope, we're not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what that says about our world building and our culture, but I'm sure a linguist could tell me.
Well, let me assure you that as far as I know, I'm done with it now. So
that's fine. That's fine.
I wonder, like, I think part of my reaction to it, Dan, and I have to admit, I have a very strong reaction to that word as well, is just the implicit framing of a part of the body of 50% of the world as being something negative.
Yeah.
And you know, we do that as well when, oh, he's such a dick, you know, but like I think there's some sort of understanding of maybe what we mean by that as someone who's being, you know, super aggressive or overwhelming or power, whatever, like and the C word, I don't know that there is any sort of similar thing. It's really just very, very sexist.
In the chat, somebody brought up the word fanny, which we use here without thinking about it, and yet to the British that's extremely offensive, and generally refers to a different part of the anatomy.
Okay.
We think of the fanny as being around back, and the Brits think of it as being around front.
Okay.
I did not know that. I knew that it was common in American vernacular and not so much in British English, but I didn't know that the specific geography.
That reminds me of a whole other, area of cursing, which is through gestures. And I do know that there are gestures that are fine here that are cursed, that are very offensive in other places.
I heard somebody say once that the biggest cultural difference between America and England is common language. So,
Yeah.
They're two nations separated by a common language.
I think
Yeah.
I think it counted up to like 4 now when you throw in the New Zealanders and the Australians.
And as authors, I guess we can see it as a great example of like how can you use cursing so effectively to separate the cultures, because like if you
And we see that too in situations where like in historical romances and stuff, somebody might slap somebody with their glove or actually slap somebody or whatever, and it means something different. Or of course in Firefly, Mal gets stuck in a duel by just saying something that he didn't realize was going to be taken differently. Somebody in chat, Daniel Spinks brings up the word fag, which has historically been slang for, a small thing that you set on fire. I mean, it started off as a fag, a piece of wood, and then, people still use it for something you smoke, oh, can I bum a fag off of you? And then, of course, it transformed into meaning homosexual. And then similar to what Doc was saying, I know I'm a big part of the LGBT community. I'm bi myself, but and I don't use it this way, but I've definitely, had a gay roommate of me at one point was talking to his boyfriend, and I don't know what his boyfriend was saying, but Brendan was just like, fag. And he meant it clearly really affectionately. And there is that other thing that you can do with those words that are kind of prohibitive. We see that in this culture with the N-word, people who have been the target of it derogatorily might then adopt it to use amongst themselves in a way that the out groups
it's a
aren't allowed to.
classic example of reclamation of a word or an insult or something that like one person who's in that group can say it to another, but I better not. Right. If I use either of those words, I deserve to get my ass kicked. Right. Like.
Yeah, there are many examples where people within a group can say something about themselves which like others cannot. Absolutely.
Yeah, the N-word is the one word that I've actually threatened my daughter that if I ever hear her say it, I will wash her mouth out with soap.
Yeah. And yet, in some communities, like they use it between themselves, and that's fine. If you belong to this group, you can. But and all of these things, so we're talking about that. All of these things are great tools in writing and in world building. So, and I think, so in my case, I avoid any controversial words. So if you talk about C word or N word, I wouldn't use it in my books just because, as I know, like George Martin used it in his books and he was fine. And he used it in an appropriate situation. But good rule of thumb is just not to go there unless you really, really, really can do it well.
And part of it is that if you do choose to go there in your world building, even if you're not using commonly known words, if you're trying to invent your own words and phrases that are extremely offensive, that means you have to use them in the book and show people being offended by them. And having to have characters deal with those kinds of consequences. And it all really depends on what kind of story you're using, whether you're using cursing as color, or if it's a way of showing more deeper social conflicts.
Yeah, and Danny Sitchell asks, what about minced oaths? Fork, fudge, frick. That can also show, wouldn't you say, situations of repression or self-censoring?
Well, sometimes it shows that they can't say those words on television because the Supreme Court said they can't, or the FCC said they can't, right? I mean,
like
it's
Battlestar
clearly
Galactica.
like Battlestar Galactica, and in the good Place, it was, I mean, sort of spoilers for The Good Place. If you haven't seen it, you really should.
Oh.
Well, initially it's that they can't say it because they're in heaven and you're not allowed to curse, right? And they do such a good job with bullshit and fork you and fork this, and it's hilarious. But well, I don't, I guess the show's been out long enough and been off the air now. Like, they're not, you learn by the end of the first season, they're not actually in heaven, they are in hell, and it's part of their punishment is that they can't curse. And they really want to, right? Part of the sort of subtle punishment is that they cannot use those words.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes away the whole release of using invective.
Yeah, the catharsis of saying frack or saying fork is not the same. It's just not. It's the sound. Anna talked about this earlier, right? Curses have to have a sound as well as the meaning. They have to be a unit of sound and an interval of meaning. And the sound, that 4-letter word we all use, it's just so satisfying the way it sounds when it comes out of your mouth sometimes.
And then you have those situations, like I have a friend who was up on a ladder doing something and he missed the nail, you know, and started to swear, and then realized his toddler was watching him, so he altered his swear word, whereupon she corrected him as to the proper pronunciation.
Oh Lord. No, you brought back a memory of when I was in college. I didn't think that I had a good grasp of cursing. And I was working at a Taco Bell in the kitchen, and I accidentally stuck my hand into a pot full of hot refried beans. And as I leapt across the kitchen and went to run cold water on my hand to wash it off, a string of invective just flowed from my mouth, and it's like, oh, I do know how to do it.
I think if you were a character in the book, it would tell a lot about you immediately. Because I think there are other people who probably wouldn't swear, and both reactions would be natural to those people.
We have a question from Jacob Sprunk, who asked, where does most of the lexicon of words or cultural vocabulary for cursing develops as a reaction to cultural restrictions or as a natural outgrowth of creative development? Does every culture have to have cursing or something, or is it a form of asserting emotional aggression or dominance, or what do you think? Where does it come from?
And I feel like that's a question for a linguist, right? Like, not a bunch of fantasy novelists.
Well, so
which is to say, I'm not really sure.
Yeah. So a language has to have so it has to have expressions all the way from really good to really bad. So there have to be some words that express, so they evoke extreme emotional reaction from others. And I mean, I guess it's one of the uses of curses. So I think in each language and in each culture, so you have to have some words like which you say, and then everybody will just stop and either realize you're extremely upset or like that something terrible happened. And I think like extreme curse words sometimes serve that function. So people overuse them, they become kind of part of the language, and then they lose this function. But so I think in each culture there have to be curse words. They evolve this way, and eventually they lose some of their potency just because people start using them too much. And then probably some new words will emerge, like we mentioned a couple of words here which none of us would ever say. And but like if any of us said those words, it would be guaranteed to have like a very strong reaction from everyone around us. So yeah, so I don't think it's aggression, and I don't think it's certain people. Each person in their life probably encounters situations where like they have to say something like that. And for each person, it would be different depending on their level of tolerance. But like people who grew up around everyone cursing will have like bigger range than people who grew up like, I don't know, in a Catholic finishing school.
Or who read a lot of books with effective cursing in them, right?
Yeah.
See, I think it would be interesting to specifically study children of people in communities that have a strong aversion to cursing. And because there is such a cathartic release to using invective, I think you'll find is that those kids will will repurpose words that they know, and that kind of goes back into the last question, because that's part of where you get some of these tamped down words. I mean, some of them are obviously things that somebody has said, okay, I really want to say fuck, but instead I'm going to have this person say fudge. But I think if you look at the kids, you'll find out that, you know, they will take something and they'll use it, that there's some kind of human need for certain types of release for that kind of cursing. Now, in terms of well, I was about to say in terms of cursing someone else, that might be different, but you get angry at yourself, you get angry at other people, you get angry at bad situations, and invective is all a part of the way of dealing with that.
Yeah.
I think
cursing other people can become very different, of course, in fantasy, where your curses might actually have effects, right? So that's
this is true. If you're working in a universe where words have power, then you could very quickly go from an innocent blow off of steam to invoking a greater power to do something.
Yeah, that would be cool.
And some of that can even be psychological, right? I'm reminded of in The Color Purple, when a woman is leaving an abusive situation, she says, until you've been done right by me, nothing's gonna work, you know, nothing's gonna come your way until you do right by me. And, you know, if you internalize that kind of message, then words have power, I guess I should say, whether they have magic behind them or not, wouldn't you say?
So I've seen people both in the chat and in the question and answer session bringing up a word holy crow, which is used apparently in 50 Shades of Grey. And I'm probably one of the few people here who read 50 Shades of Grey. I didn't notice this. So yeah, I think it...
Everyone told me it was boring, so I didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the author probably intended it to be cute and original. I don't think it quite worked because, I mean, I didn't notice it. Some people probably noticed it. So this is like, I think, one example where creating a curse word or like any type of a curse word may not be worth it because it's too similar to what we all used to. So to me, I didn't stop to think about it twice. Yeah, it's kind of cute to say holy crow instead of holy cow, but yeah, doesn't, yeah, right. And then I think some people mentioned that in English, a lot of substitute words have to do with food. Like you say fudge or sugar instead of
Yeah.
food. And yeah, I don't
Was
know
the
that.
sitcom where the Southern waitress used to say "kiss my grits" as an insult to people instead of "kiss my ass"? It was it Alice?
Yep.
The sitcom based on the movie.
Yeah. In the show Alice.
Flow. Yes.
And I think here my comment would be that food is another great world building tool. So if you, so this is another like thing that is on my priority list. I actually write recipe books for each of my worlds. And I think, and that not in the novel, like behind the scenes, sometimes I just give out recipe cards to people who buy my books. But yeah, so food is another very important aspect of any culture. And if you connect food and cursing, yeah, it makes perfect sense, you know, because food is a socially acceptable form of enjoyment, and then you connect it to cursing, it becomes much more powerful. Excuse me.
And if you do it right, it can be very, very memorable. I'm thinking of the Rio series of movies where the mother/owner of the main character is from Minnesota, I think, and her invective is cheese and sprinkles. And he's picked it up from her, right? And so it's completely unique. None of the other characters would say it. Like cheese and sprinkles. Because we also title food with swear words, shit on a shingle. Yeah, we do that as well. That could be interesting world building.
With army slang, so they were
slang.
already inclined to swear.
Yeah.
I think people also a mention of telepathic cursing.
Yeah, people curse telepathically.
Yeah. So I mean, what comes to mind, like in Star Trek, there's this Counselor Troy's mother, who is telepathic, and she every time she sees Captain Picard, she kind of implies without saying that he has some improper thoughts about her. And we don't know if it's true or not, but it works very effectively. She'll just like blush, and it's like, and everybody can imagine what happened. So, yeah, the telepathic cursing certainly doesn't have the same sound as the real cursing.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Do any of you have favorite colorful cursors in literature, or especially SF?
In SFF, I mean, when I think about cursing, and especially in the form of insults, I think about Shakespeare. I think about Act 2, Scene 2 of King Lear, where Kent is insulting Oswald, and he uses all these like class-based curses, which is not, since English society is so class stratified, and especially then, when there were some Sharia laws about who could wear what and who could own what and things like that. He calls him an eater of broken meats, which I just love. That it sounds so good, and what it means is your employer doesn't think enough of you to give you whole joints of food. He gives you his leftovers, right? That's what eater of broken meats means. You get things that he's already, joints he's already cracked open and already started eating and doesn't want to finish. He calls him a super serviceable finical rogue, which means you run to court to sue people because you're afraid to confront them yourself. You serve too many like lawsuits to people instead of trying to handle business on your own. I guess those are curses of a kind, right? They're insults, but I guess they're not SFF.
In Harry Potter,
I mean, Shakespeare has ghosts sometimes. There's some supernatural.
Sure. In Harry Potter, there's a similar, there's insults that have to do with race, with being mixed with Muggles, and I have seen quite a lot of fantasy where you'll just see something like dust eaters or some sort of reference to class. This reminds me actually of a comment yesterday. I was telling one of our tech hosts that this panel was coming up, and he mentioned that he had spent a year in Japan, where there was a lot of like, if you really wanted to insult somebody, you could just speak to them very rudely, right? Like not give them honorifics that you normally would have in the language. So not even like using rude words or crude words, but leaving off indications of politeness or respect. And I think that's one of the things about a different culture. Anna, you were talking about needing to be emotionally, say something bad, but in some cultures, maybe you can say something bad by not saying anything, for instance.
Yeah, but then again, it doesn't have the same role of a sound of a good curse.
It doesn't have the same sound, but if you felt your world, do you think it would potentially come across?
Right. So I mean, so if we're talking about curse language, I don't think that would do it. But yeah, in terms of offending somebody, definitely yes. I mean, if you want to be offensive, you don't have to use curse words, and in fact, you can use perfectly polite words and be very offensive to a person. And I think that's another tool which could be really well done in fiction. Yeah.
Someone in the chat mentions Doctor Who had a culture where it was tantamount to swearing to not bracket your speech with the syllables of your own name.
Yeah.
So that's sort of blasphemy, like not necessarily a curse word, but like, I guess, I don't know about blasphemy, but something that's really culturally shocking, perhaps.
But yeah, I think also I have to add, like, for authors who are interested in this. So if you feel like you're not quite sure, you can't invent a good curse word. Excuse me, it's better to not, it's better to use something very common that people understand than to try to like invent a word just for the sake of inventing and make it not work. And I think, so my example is Terry Pratchett. I don't think he has a lot of invented curse words. He uses like very common English curse words, and they work so well there. It's just like every time somebody says it, it's right on. So yeah, but I agree. So Harry Potter is my example of like how it can be done really well and creatively. And again, there are not a lot of curse words in there, which are unique, but they do work really well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I go back to Doc E.E. Smith's Lensman series, and he tried to invent a curse word or a system of cursing by having a particular character invoke, various space gods, and it wasn't so much invoking the god as invoking parts of the god, like by Clortho's mighty horns or something like that. And at first it puts you off because you don't know who this character is, and he never bothers to explain it other than saying that this Kinnison is invoking the space god. But as you read through the rest of the series, you get used to it, and you just kind of go with it. So it's like it's an interesting case in that it both works and doesn't work. And I have to wonder if that was in some relationship to the swearing of the time that he was used to, that he was trying to emulate, that we may have culturally lost since then.
Someone in the chat early on mentioned a fantasy book. They couldn't remember the title, where one of the characters would swear by a certain goddess's saggy red tits, and then without realizing the goddess was listening and was like, "Now what now?" Sounded funny setup. And somebody else mentions Bry Grabthar's hammer, which was
from Galaxy Quest.
From Galaxy Quest, very memorable, and they used it well in the character arc, I think, too. That he didn't initially want to reflect that made up belief system, but that it was actually important to another character, so he invokes it because of its importance to them. I think that's an interesting point, that curses and oaths like that can be used to manipulate in both positive and negative ways, of course. But if you misjudge your audience, that's an issue. But for your character, anyway. Have any of you ever done that in your writing?
Judge the audience. Yeah, all the time.
Where your character unintentionally offended someone. Yeah.
I've not done that yet. Hopefully I will avoid that. I want to only intentionally.
Yeah, and I think so in real life, I think we're allowed much more error than we're allowed in fiction. So it's like, sometimes I feel like there are some real life events. So if I wrote a novel about this, everybody would say this is not believable. This couldn't happen in real life, right? So
and that will invariably be something that you took from real life and fictionalized and softened.
So
yeah, I've heard Neil Gaiman complain that he loves to take names from real people, but very often those are the very names that people are like, that's totally nonsense. Nobody would ever be named that. Yeah. Right. So Doc, I wanted to ask you, are there any steampunk in particular curses that you've come across or used?
I have thought of some. I have not particularly used some. In one of the short stories in the Shining Cog, you have an entire group of people who are known as the followers of the Clockworker, and they're pretty much all tinkerers and machinists. And these are the kind of people who would they would curse in terms of inferior materials, broken springs, this smacks of a poorly engineered design type of thing. But I haven't had a story. I haven't had a story in that world where I've needed to do that kind of cursing.
There is some curses coming up in the chat as you're talking.
Yeah.
Which is write them down. Yeah, I think I also wanted to add, so sometimes so you can use a regular word as a curse if you have this intention. And that's also some tool like I sometimes use because, yeah, basically, so if you call somebody, I don't know, just a man, but you say it offensively, it would be like offensive to the character. And this could also be used well.
Well, and speaking of offensive, somebody mentioned Firefly and how they're using Chinese to curse, which sounds really expressive. And I know that the actors studied really hard to try to say the words accurately, and the world building, just reflects the possible or probable rise of the Chinese culture, since there's so many Chinese and they're very inventive in the solar system, in that universe. But other people have raised the question of whether it's appropriation and inappropriate, and especially as if fans use those phrases in forums and stuff like that without necessarily recognizing that there might be Chinese fans in the same forums who might not know the context. Anyway, Doc?
Part of what was going on in the sci-fi world was that there was a Chinese and an American cultural coming together that was part of that was the basis of the diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
But while English is the dominant language because it's a show for Americans, if you notice, not only do they curse in Chinese, but their most affectionate terms of endearment are also in Chinese. I can't remember his name. Simon Tam always refers to River as Mei Mei.
Oh yeah, his little sister.
which is sister, and
Yeah.
it was intended to show a cultural blending. But it also made it convenient to cut the censors by putting all the cursing in Chinese.
Mei Mei isn't just sister; it's actually specifically younger sister, by the way.
Okay.
So Daniel, we haven't heard from you in a while. We're getting down to our last minutes. So I want to say, last thoughts, and if you want to throw in anything about where people can find you on the internet and stuff.
Well, in regards to Firefly, I'd feel like it'd be a lot more authentic if there were any like Chinese people in the show, which there often weren't, I don't think. Certainly not like in any main roles. We hear that that Chinese is a dominant culture, but I feel like we don't see it aside from like window dressing with the cursing and stuff. But it would be better to let an actual Chinese or Chinese American person probably comment on that. But last is to where you can find me at Sounding Line on Twitter. I'll put that in the chat to panelists and attendees. Thanks everybody for coming. And I don't know. I don't have any other last thoughts. Sorry.
May you curse colorfully for the rest of your life. Yes.
Yeah.
So Anna, you want to?
I put my Twitter handle and my blog page in the chat. I just I remembered, sorry, I just have to say it because I remember Terry Pratchett's novel where every curse they said came to life and became a creature, and that was like also so brilliantly done. So because of this, they were forced to say like sugar instead of like the real word. Incredibly unhappy about it. I think it was Hogfather, but I don't remember which novel exactly. But it was brilliantly done. It's just
CV asked if each panelist could say if you have an all-time favorite curse, say what it is as well as your final thoughts. Do you have one, Anna?
Me? Say no. I will spare you guys.
Okay. All right. Doc?
As far as a favorite curse, I always disliked the fact that we would tell people fuck you or call someone a fucker, because it's like, well, that means having sex, which means that person gets to have sex, and it's like that's too good for them. So I came up with the phrase bastard masturbator.
There you go.
Yeah.
Daniel, did you have a favorite curse?
I mean, I just like fuck. It's so versatile. You can use it in a lot of ways. And in my most recent book, my next book that comes out in 2022, I used it a lot. And some of my beta readers told me, you gotta get rid of this. And then my favorite note I probably ever got from my agent was they wrote, no, keep the fucks, they're good. And I was like, when my agent wrote keep the fucks, I knew for sure I had the right agent for me.
Yeah.
Okay, Doc, where can people find you?
I just dropped all my links into the chat, but generally you can find me at doccoleman.com or go to Amazon and search for Doc Coleman Steampunk. I'd also like to point out a question from Sonia talking about Celtic culture thought you could curse someone with a song, and it's like, this is why in D&D you never piss off the bard, because they will roast you for the rest of your life through the mouths of villagers everywhere.
Probably a good rule for real life too. Yeah.
Bravely turned and fled. Yes, it's the people who write history and or songs will determine how you are remembered.
Will determine your fate.
Well, thank you all so much for what was a very fun panel. We are raise your hand if you might show up on the Discord. Anybody? Okay.
I'll be in the Discord for at least a little bit, and then I've got another 11:30 panels.
Okay. So our tech host has put the link in the chat, and thanks again. This was fun.
Thanks so many of you for coming out this morning for curses.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank
There's
you.
never a bad time for cursing. Right?
May you
All right.
live in colorful times.
Yeah. Thank you. This was fun.
Thanks a lot.